Gang Territory, Chapter 4, Number 26, Part 1. None of the houses in the street seemed to have a number. There were names like Rose Cottage or Sunny Fields, but no numbers. Suddenly 2 boys came out of one of the houses. They ran towards me, each holding a homemade wooden gun. "Stop!" they cried. "Give us a password." I groaned. This looked like more trouble. I'd already had enough for one day. I stood still and inspected them closely as they approached. Despite being older and bigger than me, I somehow realized that they were not so much a menace as a nuisance. There was a flat-looking expression in their eyes, and they wore the strangest haircuts I'd ever seen. Their heads were cropped short all over, except at the very front, where a long fringe fell nearly into their eyes. They pointed their guns at me and commanded, "Password! What's the password?" "Where's number 26?" I asked. "That ain't the password," one of them exclaimed. "Why are you walking so funny?" "Mind yours," I retorted tartly. "That ain't the password neither," he said. "We're special constables looking out for German spies," said the other excitedly. "No one goes further unless they gives the password." "Do you think the Germans send out schoolboys to do their spying?" I riposted scornfully. "Just tell me where number 26 is. The King's house." "The King's house?" responded one of them suspiciously. "The King lives in London." All this was getting me nowhere. I decided to ignore them. "Non compos mentis," I muttered as I rushed past them, continuing to look for street numbers. They offered no resistance, but one of them put 2 fingers in his mouth and gave a shrill whistle that made me wince. Then they followed slowly along just behind me, their guns pointed at my back. To whom were they signalling with that whistle? I didn't have long to find out. In a kind of recess in the street was a shop with an open counter at the front. Several animal carcasses hung inside. Over the front, in big gold letters, was inscribed, "Bates and Son, Family Butchers." A bulky young man, almost an adult, came out from a passage at the side of the shop, wiping his hands on a piece of cheesecloth. He was wearing a long blue and white striped apron and a determined air. I decided my best strategy was to treat him courteously as though he were an adult, and ask him politely for number 26. It was not to be. Before I could open my mouth, one of my armed escorts called out, "Hey, Bill, we caught a spy. He walks funny and he talks funny, uses foreign words. He's out to get the King." I could have laughed out loud at this stupidity, were it not that they all seemed to take it seriously, and my ribs hurt like hell. 3 other boys came running up and stood around gaping. Bill reached down and grabbed me by the shoulder. I winced. He had a powerful grip. "Right, what you doing here?" "If you'd be so kind as to release my shoulder, Bill," I said politely, "perhaps I'd tell you." "Cheeky with it too," he exclaimed, grasping me even more tightly and giving me a shake which did nothing to calm my bruised side. "Me name's Bates. Mr. Bates to you." "Yes, Mr. Bates," I said quickly. "What I'm doing here, Mr. Bates, is that I'm looking for number 26, Mr. Bates, sir." "That's better," he said, not seeming to realize that I was mocking him. "See?" yelled one of the 2 with the peculiar haircuts. "He's looking for his spy contact." "Who's number 26? demanded Bill belligerently. "You'd better answer, or it'll be the worse for you." I looked at him scathingly. "It's not a person, Mr. Bates. It's a house. The King's house. I would be most grateful, Mr. Bates, if you would be so kind as to point it out to me." "See?" yelled my escort. "We told you so. He's after the King." Bill Bates was perplexed. He knew something was not quite right about this, and he was trying to work out what it was. But thinking was not his strong point. At this moment a new, young voice from behind my back intervened sharply. "Bill Bates, what do you think you are doing, you great loon?" Bill immediately let go of my shoulder as though it had suddenly become red hot. I turned to discover that the speaker was none other than Winifred. She stood there, hands on hips, staring severely up at the massive Bill. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Why don't you pick on somebody your own size?" This was rich coming from her. She was even shorter than I was, if somewhat rounder. "How dare you pick on my friends?" she added ferociously. This last filled me with delight. We had not yet exchanged a word, only a nodding glance in class, and yet here she was, calling me her friend. The world suddenly became more rosy. "Well," growled Bill, discomfited, surrounded as he was by his supporters, "we didn't know who he were, with his foreign ways and all. You can't be too careful in wartime. He'd better not come a-spying around here again, that's all I can say," he added darkly. "You get back to your dad's shop," commanded Winifred. "That's where you belong, you great lump of stupid meat, all muscle and no brain. As for the rest of you, get along back home now." She turned her back on them, moving towards a house at the end of a row just opposite the butcher's shop. She beckoned to me. "Come along," she said. "Hurry, dinner's been on the table for ages. Where have you been? Mum sent me out to find you." Just as well she did, I was beginning to think. I'd never find number 26. How come there aren't any numbers on the houses? "Oh, here everybody knows everybody, and where they live, so there's no need for numbers. But our house has a number." She pointed to the door under a little porch of the end house. Behind a low wall it had the smallest front garden I had ever seen. A single hop would take you right over it. It was as full as it possibly could be with yellow marigolds. Beyond them, stretching almost the whole width of the marigold bed, was a small window fitted with gay curtains. "Your house is very small," I said hesitantly, hoping she wouldn't take it as adverse criticism. I need not have worried. "Yes, it's cute, isn't it?" she said happily. "Actually, it's bigger than it looks from the front. Although it's only one room wide, it stretches back quite a long way. You'll see once you get inside. As it's the last of the row, every room has a big window at the side. Look," she said proudly, and pointed along a gravelly track alongside the house that seemed to lead down into a field. At the entrance to the track was a notice reading, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted by order Widlington Parish Council." "What's down there?" I asked. "Oh, that's the allotments. At least it used to be. But what with the war and everything, nearly all the men are away. It's mostly potatoes now. A few of the older men keep up their allotments, though." We reached the door. She pushed it open and cried, "He's here at last, Mum. That stupid Bill Bates was keeping him. Pretended he was a spy." "A spy? My word," said a comfortable-looking round woman, hardly any taller than I was myself. "And you bombed out from London and all. Come here and let me give you a hug." To my great embarrassment she gave me a warm hug. Normally I kept away from such sentimental demonstrations, at least from adults, but this time I submitted. Truth to tell, since there was nobody there to witness the scene except Winifred, I rather enjoyed it, despite my painful ribs. "Why don't you give him a hug too, Winifred?" I felt myself turning hot and pink as Winifred, no less pink than I was, took me in her arms. I held her for a very long time, much longer than I had held her mother. I needed time to blink back the prickly tears that unaccountably filled my eyes. It would never do to blubber. My code of behaviour forbade it absolutely. "Come along, children," called Mrs. King cheerfully. "Set yourselves down at table. The meal's getting cold. You sit here opposite Winifred," she said to me, indicating a chair as she bustled away into the kitchen. I sat down and gazed at the table. Mrs. King put a plate in front of me. It was piled with sausages and mashed potatoes. "It's not much," she said, "but with the war it's not easy to make do. It's just our ordinaries. I hope you like it." I gazed in wonder at the plate, at the table, at Winifred, at Mrs. King. Then something seized up inside me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I felt as though I were choking. "Is everything all right, dear?" asked Mrs. King solicitously. Her question ran around in my head like the echoes of a great bell in a cathedral. I couldn't seem to catch up with it. I struggled to speak. I struggled for breath and mastery of myself. I was totally overcome by the marvellous, generous, homely simplicity of what was happening to me, of the loaded table, of the warm, loving greeting. A frozen something inside me began to thaw. "Mrs. King," I gasped at last. She peered at me anxiously. "Mrs. King, it's so wonderful," I managed to get out. I've never before." I drew a deep shuddering breath and pronounced slowly, "This really is the King's house." The thaw then broke the icy blockage with a rush. I hid my face in my hands and howled. The tears ran through my fingers to add their salt to the mashed potatoes. All this in front of someone I had only just met and a new classmate. I felt utterly undone, utterly ashamed. Mrs. King jumped up and put her arms around me. Winifred did the same from the other side. To my astonishment, I saw that both of them were sobbing too. There, dear," said Mrs. King softly. "Just let it all out. It must have been awful in that horrible orphanage. The bombs, losing your parents and all. We understand. It was like that when we lost Winnie's big brother. He was in the Royal Navy, you know, and then, shortly after, his dad." She choked, and I could feel her shaking. Winifred sank to her knees, put her head in my lap, and just clung to me. Perhaps she saw in me something of her brother. We stayed like that for some time. I don't really know how long. Then Mrs. King gave a little gasp, stood up, and said matter-of-factly, "Well, this won't add any inches to your height, and the dinner's all cold now. I'll go and heat it up again." She gathered the plates and took them busily into the kitchen. Winifred raised her head, got up off her knees, looked me red-eyed in the face, and asked anxiously, "You won't tell anyone, will you? Not anyone, ever. Promise?" "I won't if you don't," I said solemnly. "I promise." I made a little cross with my hand over my left breast, where the heart is supposed to be. "I promise too," she said, and made the same gesture over her heart. Then, glancing up towards the kitchen, she leaned swiftly across me and kissed me on the mouth. She gave a little smile. "That's because you remind me a bit of my brother." "I'm glad," I said, smiling back. It was the truth. "What have you done to your face?" she said, touching her own face just below the left eye. "My face?" I queried, copying her gesture, but thinking she was referring to the effect of my tears. "There's a red wheal from your ear almost to your nose. You didn't have it in class this morning." Then I remembered the slug's switch. "Oh, it's nothing," I said airily. "Just a twig from the hedge." I gave her full marks for sharp observation. She immediately confirmed this assessment, but at the same time put me in an awkward spot. "There's no hedge between the school and here," she remarked quickly. "If that great oaf of a Bates—" She didn't get any further. Her mother, entering with 3 steaming plates, interrupted. "Winnie, dear, you know very well I don't like you saying bad things about people." I didn't want to have to lie about the wheal on my face, so I asked, "Who were those two boys with the wooden guns? They didn't seem very bright to me." Winifred laughed. "They're the Halflin brothers, Arthur and Alfred. They go to the secondary school. You're right about their not being bright." "Winnie, what did I just say?" reproached her mother. "Oh, all right, mother. But everyone knows they're only ninepence in the shilling." She turned towards me. "It's the village inbreeding," she explained. "Winifred!" exclaimed her mother, shocked. But she was laughing all the same. She too turned towards me. "You're not to repeat that," she commanded severely, but the laughter remained in her eyes. Winifred continued to justify herself. "Well, he might just as well know, since he's going to live here. The brothers belong to the gang." "What gang?" I asked, a little apprehensively. "The street gang, of course," replied Winifred, as though there were no other. "Are you the leader?" Winifred burst out laughing. "They don't allow girls in the gang. Bill Bates is the leader. He seems to do what you say. So do the others." "They better had," she said darkly, but gave no further explanation. "If I had a gang," I said, "I'd have only girls. It'd be much less violent and a whole lot more intelligent." Winifred seemed to approve this idea. "You'd have plenty of volunteers," she said wistfully. "I'd join." "Would you really?" "Yes, really." "I think I would too," said her mother. "But oh, look at the time! If you don't hurry, you'll be late for school." With which she bundled us out of the house. Winifred set off at a half-run. I tried hard to adopt a normal gait and keep up with her, but with my ribs hurting the way they were, I dropped further and further behind. She stopped with an irritated look on her face. "Can't you go any faster? If we're not in the schoolyard by the time the bell stops ringing, we're in trouble." "You go on. With all that fabulous sausage and mash, I've got a stitch," I lied. "Just go on." I limped along with my hands holding my painful sides, but like a good friend she didn't go on. She stayed loyally by my side. "Ha! Boys!" she muttered disgustedly. We got close to the uphill side of the yard when the bell started to ring. "Run!" I commanded urgently. "You can make it. No sense in both of us getting caught. I'll be okay." Fortunately, she saw my point and didn't argue. She sprinted off downhill. Also, fortunately, the school railings had been cut down for the war. Arriving at the top corner of the yard, I vaulted over the wall, grimacing at the pain in my side, to land inside just as the bell stopped clanging. It was unorthodox, but met the rule. I saw Winifred get into the gate just in time. She looked back up the road and was surprised not to see me. I waved from my corner. She smiled in return. Then the whistle blew, and we trotted smartly into our respective lines. I spotted the slug at the head of the 5th line. His face was a bit swollen, as though he had a bad tooth. Despite this, he gave me a nasty, sneering smile. It left me with a sinking sensation.